Let's move on. Any sense of gaps and silences, either way for anyone in the audience or for our panel? Big gaps and silences. Sofia, you have
unresolved debates.
Oh, sorry, let's move on to that first. Okay, the big unresolved debates. Ben, do you want to start on the big unresolved debates?
Yes, from panel 27 today on land titling, but also many other sessions. Following the discrediting of the Soto model, the individual land titling model, I think there's a real need to engage in discussion about what kind of modes of tenure give cultivators secure tenure, but not permanent, and without individual ownership title, but without excluding groups such as women, landless, and young people, who may want also access to farmland, and in ways that can be accepted and administered at local level. There don't seem to be any kind of tried and true alternative models there. That was the first one. And the second one was in one of the plenaries yesterday and in some panels, the question was raised about the need for better hard evidence to compare the costs and benefits of basically small-scale versus large-scale agriculture. Costs and benefits to the environment, to local people, to women, to whatever, etc. And then remarks were made about the need to broaden acquire data, baseline data about the sort of the pre-land grab situation of cultivation and so on, and the need to broaden this baseline to include all kinds of uses and benefits of the land and other resources, etc. I don't think this baseline approach is right at all. You should not compare what corporate agriculture might be able to do in the future with the current state of depressed smallholder land use, which has suffered for decades of neglect by governments and international agencies and has been partly disrupted and destroyed by the dumping of products from other countries where agriculture is heavily subsidized. If we want to take seriously or examine seriously the claim that there is a future for small-scale farming in the world, we need to compare future possible trajectories of corporate agriculture on the one hand, and future possible trajectories of revitalized small-scale mixed farming on the other, and look at the sustainability of each of these.
Thanks, Ben. That's really helpful. Any other senses of unresolved big debates that you want to draw our attention to? Yeah.
I think I couldn't agree more with what Ben has said. I also want to mention the debate about the term land grabs in general. I think it was debated at different places but remains unresolved. The question of whether we are in danger of having created a catch-all phrase which is obscuring important processes of capital accumulation and the disruption of livelihoods. Some people have talked about a typology. Would a typology actually resolve the problem of the term land grabs? I'm not sure about that. And I wonder if in 2 years we may not be seeing other terms which raise equally problematic questions. So I think the issue of beginning to think about how to describe these processes that we are seeing, which involve land and other resources, which involve big capital, which involve state governments in all sorts of roles and also have particular effects on production systems and so on is really necessary. And then two other things I want to mention. One has to do with the issue of regulation. I think the issue of regulation has been talked about at all sorts of levels. First, from the idea that regulation will not solve this problem because you can't, it would be like regulating theft or legitimizing theft and so on. And some ideas that mandatory regulations might be superior to voluntary codes and so on. But I think it raises a broader question of what kinds of regulations and under what circumstances would regulations be useful or not useful. And the last one being a question which was not answered of which institutional processes and which institutions and processes should be the focus of our research, our analysis, and our activism. Because clearly from this conference, we can see that there are a whole range of institutions and actors, and which are fundamental, and which of them are only supporting processes, which of them look very visible but may not be the real culprits or the real should not be the real targets of all our energies and so on. So those were some of the things.
Okay, I have one clear omission I see that the debate we didn't have, we should have, and 4 debates that I want to flag in addition to all this what has been said already. The omission, I think, and it came to me, it really struck me yesterday morning when we heard the presentation by Foodfirst, was to make the linkage versus what's happening in northern countries, and this example of supermarkets being cited on poor neighborhoods and so on. I found that really striking, the possible connections with what we're observing in the south, but also somebody said consumption, right? We have had a lot of local studies, we have had a lot of attempts to try to kind of link up, but we have had very little attention to how that all connects with consumption, how consumption is driving certain things. So that's a debate I think we should have sometime soon. 4 debates that I saw popping up and find very interesting. One is, okay, well, how do we, what's driving all this? You know, there's a tendency to kind of say there is some kind of engine that drives all these bad outcomes you see. There's some kind of, somebody called it a negative logic there. And that's one way to get at it, but I think we should also think about other ways to get at, whatever you call it, capitalism or so, that acknowledges that there are actually many sides of contestations or struggle that you actually can intervene, and that creates connections with more activist interests. I think that's a really important debate that we should have. A second debate is really the question, what's at stake? You know, is it land as a productive resource, as many people seem to argue, or is it more like rural revalorization, a revalorization of rural resources, or is it more about the right of self-determination, culture people brought up? I think that's an important debate to have. Third is our interest in dispossession of land. It's connected with the previous one, or is it about broader process of rural exclusion? You know, people, we don't want to tie necessarily people to land, right? So what is our interest? Is it dispossession of land or rural exclusion? Exclusion of rural people. And last, you just flagged that I support it very much in terms of what levers are there available to intervene in these processes, and to what extent does it make sense to focus on global regulations? You know, is that really the best way, most effective way to try to do something against these processes?
Yes, in terms of the debates, well, for us, the debate, which is very much policy relevant, is the one on the role of private investors and investment in itself. And I think, well, it was very much present here. And I think we need also to have a more differentiated picture about the investors, because it's of course not the same thing having private equity investors coming in and having, of course, medium-sized agricultural entrepreneurs. So we have to have a more nuanced, or a mining company, an agricultural company, and all these things, and try to understand the way they operate better. And as I said in the morning, it's also very urgent for us to unpack the whole concept of investment and different types of investment and all these things.
Thanks very much. Who has more sort of key debates that you would like to notice?
I would like to remind, maybe I didn't get it, that land grabbing is not just the company. I'm assuming here that we are just debating about company, but the state has also grabbed land and dispossessed people. And in India, we have a forest department which has dispossessed millions of tribals every year. So I think one thing is that the land grab which dispossessed people, we must call for a moratorium on it, a complete moratorium by the state. That should be the first thing. And the second thing I would have liked here is that when we are fixing up an agenda for land, land redistribution should not be on the back burner. And that is my real worry, because we are just ignoring the vast millions of people world over, in South Asia particularly, who don't even have half an acre of land for living. And if this becomes the biggest agenda, while all solidarity against the land acquisition and everything, but we must not ignore this great fact that the government have failed to do the Jamidari abolition and land redistribution to the landless people.
Very much. Yeah, what I'm left thinking really about is sort of, to sum it up, would be continuities and discontinuities. I mean, coming in here, you know, I suppose, like many people, I probably assumed, oh, land grabbing. This is something new. It's something different. But of course, as the days go along and we unpack it and we compare it, we say, well, it's nothing new really, nothing new under the sun. And so that's been an emerging theme. But I think we have to, many of us, the media, many people out there in the wider world, myself, instinctively feel, yeah, but it's different. It's different actors, it's different processes. We can't just explain it in the same old categories as before. And I just had a great session on China in the world. And again, in the debate, to which Ben contributed very valuably, the idea of why are we talking about a special type of Chinese capitalism? And of course, that's very, very, very interesting, very provocative. But yet you go away thinking, no, but there is something special, there is something different, something particular. I can't explain it intellectually, but part of me feels it. So, you know, it is this tension, this what is new, what is not new. But getting to the more substantial issue, we can see that there are new players, there are new processes. Those people who are leading the land grabs. There's a whole range of issues there to understand. What's particularly interesting for me is the role of the state in many of the, if you like, the receiving countries. This is something that I raised earlier. Whereas in the past we would have spoken about the comprador state, or we were talking about corruption of various kinds. But now, for goodness sake, it's in the name of development. And not just development, but agricultural development and food security. Things we thought that many developing country governments had completely lost interest in. You know, this is our language. You know, but it has been used in perverse new ways. So that forces us to think in new ways. And the third one I would say is the political dimension, especially at the local level. Many of us would have assumed, you know, that the agrarian questions are resolved through balance of class forces at the national or perhaps at the local level. But now we're seeing that the major movement, the major action is being parachuted in. It's happening way above the heads of people. It's not necessarily happening where there is intense struggle. It's happening often in marginalized areas where people are not well organized. And the terrain of struggle is now where? It's in the UN, in the ILO, in IDS, what's happening on the ground. So I think linking some of these global processes to struggles on the ground challenges us to engage in new ways. The political dimension to this, articulating local struggles with this sort of international debate. I think there's a lot of work, there's a lot of thinking to be done.
Well, I think when we start thinking about what's missing or lacking, of course, we thinking what's going to happen after we close the session. So, because I think this 3 days, the sharing and all the case studies was very interesting. So when I think of what's lacking, I was saying the follow-up. So then I would say the first thing would be we do some extra effort trying to frame the aspects that we agree on for working with what is land grab. Of course, and it's not a concept, but what are the aspects that we could, in follow-up, work in our fields and bring in as part of this land grab. That would be. And then the point of departure is, from my perspective, following if I understood what Eduardo was saying, it's not our agenda. So it's a reactive agenda. So our research as those who want to contribute to change things, we should think, well, beyond land grab, what's our agenda research is, our contribution to this reactive agenda. And second, from that, is that I think our challenge as researchers is how new ways to formulate the question, so new way of thinking. For example, nobody said anything here about when we're talking about relation rural and urban areas. Explicitly or implicitly, we think one day everybody will be in the cities, right? So it's a urban humanity process. So why so we're struggling? So to think in a different way, that maybe the future of humanity is not to move in cities. Of course, it brings a lot of discussion how can I do it. Although that's just an example. That our challenge is to think new ways of formulating the questions, or new way of thinking. And then, as I said in the last panel, we should, that's the third point, not to stay on land grab. They have to connect the land deal, land struggle, but land concentration. So when we're talking about all these deals, they have to bring in all the discussion, the past discussion on concentration. And then comes, I heard the first time, as far as I can recall, this morning when I listened to the civil societies, agrarian or land reform came out at the panel only this morning, as far as I remember. So, and then just to finish, then this new way of thinking, of course there's a discussion about small and large scale production, but if we agree that land is not commodity and land is not just a mean of production, so what is it in terms of food security, food sovereignty, and new ways of thinking why we stand for land and environment and a different way of thinking human society?
I think the distinctions we need to make are not only between large estates and smallholders, but we also need to introduce commercial smallholders into the equation. And particularly since the World Bank is very clear about this and has clarified this position in recent documents, that when it's talking about the efficiency of smallholders, it means commercial smallholders. And that on this principle of efficiency, least efficient smallholders should make way for commercial smallholders. And that social institutions and provision should be made for this transition and exit of smallholders from agriculture. And in many instances, this is talking about the displacement of food producers by small commercial holders in export-oriented production.
I think any conference cannot cover everything, no? So I think what's already happened here has been really good and very fantastic. Just a couple of things for the future, if people do plan to have more conferences like this, in terms of gaps. One is, I think it would be important to integrate more those who are engaged in different terrains of struggle. Because Edward, believe me, the terrains of struggle are there on the ground. They're not all in the UN. There are multiple struggles at multiple levels from multiple constituencies. And people are fighting tooth and nail for two things, for defending what they have, but also for building alternative economies, no? There are alternative visions for rural and urban societies. And people are practicing things, building them up from the ground up. But of course, these never become economies of scale, or they never get scaled up because they're left there, they're left isolated. But I think they do need our attention because we learn how people fight and how they rebuild, whether it's delinking, whether they're rethinking, rebuilding, re-economizing. And those terrains of struggle are really, really important for us to understand how people survive in the face of these massive displacements and how they build new lives. No? That's one thing. Another issue which is related, but I don't know whether anybody will agree, is I think the issue of conflict is extremely important. If we look at the governance of land and ecosystems and territories today, a lot of them have long political histories of decolonization, imperialism-related conflicts, etc. It's political histories. I mean, I come from Asia, and I tell you, Southeast Asia, South Asia, full the entire governance of land, who has access, who doesn't have access, who gets into the debate. It's a lot of it is based on political histories of conflict. And then we see now countries that are coming out of conflict, so-called post-conflict countries. And in every one of the ones that I've studied, whether East Timor, Nepal, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, the land issue is never resolved. It always comes right back to that, you know. And to this day, the fights in Cambodia on land, a lot of them have to do with Khmer Rouge and pre-Khmer Rouge problems, and the same in Laos. So I think this is something, and this is going to increase because the conflicts and the collapses that we see what is happening in North Africa are increasing. The other thing that's happening with conflict is that a lot of struggles for land are being politicized as anti-state struggles, you know, as we see in the case of India and many places, you know. So peasants who are fighting for their land are criminalized as terrorists or anti-state elements. So this then puts the entire struggle in a different light. And at some point we have to engage with these issues more systematically.
I just want to follow up from Edward Lahey's reference to the agrarian question, which would kind of link our discussions to a broader problematic. While we accept, I think, largely that land is much more than simply a means of production in terms of production functions and so on, it's important to carry the argument even in terms of the logic of the classic agrarian question. And I want to highlight the role that resistance to land grabbing can play in that context. First of all, one of the things that Bernstein says about the agrarian question is that the agrarian question of capital is solved, what remains is the agrarian question of labor. And to the extent that, I'll take both of those terms. In terms of the agrarian question of labor, obviously, if one is having a neoliberal capitalist system under the global framework, throwing people off the land, off their livelihoods, this is also a problem for the capitalist system of production. It's not just a humanitarian or an ecological kind of question. One is seeing as a kind of predatory capitalism which is destroying the resources of the earth. And so, in terms of the agrarian question of labor, we need resistance, we need struggle to reclaim the land, and to prevent land denial in terms of land reform and so on. So there are two parts to this struggle: the struggle against taking away of land, and the struggle in terms of obstacles to gaining land and restitution of occupied land. So that is one very important role that resistance to land grabbing can play in terms of solving the agrarian question of labor. But the argument, I think, doesn't stop there. One can also argue that resistance has a role for the agrarian question of capital. One of the things that we see is that the kind of capitalism and the kind of land estates that are being created are not productive. Often it is for speculation. Often land is held on to. Only a fraction of that land is productively used. So this is not really contributing to productive capitalism in terms of the logic of capitalism itself. And one of the things that struggles can do is to stop that kind of unproductive, speculative control of land. And in that sense, resistance has a role to play in terms of resolving the agrarian question of capital.
Thank you. Firstly, so my name is Jenny Bromley. I'm from the NGO Global Witness. From our perspective as an NGO, we very much appreciate the chance to understand better the academic thinking and approaches on this, and I think it's been a very good opportunity to share ideas on perspectives and understandings of the land grab issue. There's one word and framework of analysis that for me has been missing from this debate, and that is relating to corruption. We've talked a lot about governance of land, but we've not really looked at the role that high-level corruption between business and political elites plays in driving land grabs. What we can see is governments, high-level corruption between these two players enables governments to allocate large areas of land outside legal frameworks and in violation of local rights. It also prevents local communities from then getting justice, and enables these companies and the government to have impunity against prosecution in relation to the way that these land deals are being done. So from our perspective, we'd really like to explore more and understand the dynamics that corruption plays, and we think that in terms of any kind of resistance and attempts to tackle land grabbing, an understanding of corruption is central. So just to put that on the agenda for next time. We were asked our panel to come and talk about probably the least pleasurable topic, that of violence and land grabbing. And I think all of us were attempting to step back and say, we're going to be, this is kind of voyeurism, because we're all going to go back, we will have resolved nothing, we'll have reported out violence, and the violence in the cases of Uganda, northern Uganda, the Petén in Guatemala, and the north coast of Honduras is going to continue tomorrow and the next day. This is very painful. I thought that Teo's beautiful write-up of our panel, I just wanted to read, I want to thank you, Teo, for the write-up, and I think you put it very well, that the actual land grab is simply the last step in a long chain of violent events. It seems land grabs in these conflict-torn countries is simply one note among many in a terrifying crescendo. And I think we have to remember this, that's what we're talking about. This stuff is violent, and it's not just violent in the dispossession of the act, it is violent in the entire culture that surrounds it. It is very much like my people in the Appalachian South, who have gone through 20 years of corporate downsizing and outsourcing of their manufacturing, and then the loss of their lands through a commodity fetishism of land as the beautiful Blue Ridge becoming commoditized for the wealthy. And so then productive farmers get thrown off the land so that the beautiful can look at their pristine views.
and this continues. But I'd like to end this on a note of hope, which is simply that I also would like to speak to you as a former board member of Highlander, the place in the mountains that began with that song, "We Shall Overcome," that has spread around the world, and we shall overcome. Thank you.
I would like to react to, I think, an important question is why the UN institution, although their bureaucrats agrees very much with what the shooter is saying, don't say the same thing. And I think one of the most important reasons is that, contrary to Olivier, the UN institution report to their members, and the members are sovereign states. I think sovereign states remain today, despite whatever we can say, the only place where sovereignty and potentially at least democratic policy making can be done. And my point here is that the fantastic work that has been done in this conference and before all the research, I think has to be brought there. The key actors that will defeat land grabbing, that will support a peasant, a via campesina at the development are these decision makers, are the governors and the government of these countries. And it's not the first time that I'm in one of these discussions, and very often they are not in the debate. They are not in the international debate. And I think there will be an opportunity in the coming months in the CFS, in the Committee on World Food Security, to have a discussion on these issues with them, with the governments of Africa, of Asia, who unfortunately, and as it has just been said, most of them are actually supporting a vision of foreign investment as a development path. So it is with them that we have to conduct this discussion. And one of the, I think, very, very needed input is to have evidence-based research from the field that can inform the discussion with the decision maker in the capitals, in Bamako, in Lusaka, in Guatemala City, because this is, it's not in Rome or in Brighton that we change the things, unfortunately.